Welcome to MedTech Disruptors. My name is David Philby. I'm the founder of Elevra Consulting. On this show, we interview commercial leaders who have taken a disruptive technology from early phase through to launch or even merger and acquisition. It's all about the journey, the highs and the lows, how to create new markets, what is high performance culture, the risks and rewards, and leading commercial teams in growth companies. We hope this gives you good insight and advice on how to advance your own career. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy the show. This week we spoke to Michael Magnani, a serial CEO of early stage startups in the medtech space. We talked about what it's like to be the first non-technical or scientific hire in a company, and what are the responsibilities of a CEO in a pre-approved company. A really rare perspective. Let's get into it. Welcome, Michael, to this week's episode. Excited to have you on. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, David. I'm doing well.
Fantastic. Super interesting story. We love speaking to people that get in from the ground up, especially people from a commercial perspective. So commercial perspective, but being a founder is a super interesting story. So I'm excited to dive into this. I guess for the benefit of listeners, take us through a bit of an intro first, and before we dig into it.
Yeah, no, happy to. I'm actually I'm a jack of all trades is sort of how I position myself, and I actually, unlike a lot of folks who have known that they wanted to get into medical devices their whole careers, I kind of fell into it due to some life circumstances. My background was actually in healthcare management consulting, and I worked mostly with big biotech companies prior to grad school. Um, Went back to a program back in Boston for grad school, spent my summers again with Amgen and Genzyme, was sort of going down that trajectory. And, my wife had a lifelong dream to go to space and decided to apply to be an astronaut. And I said, if you get that, I'll move to Houston. And she got that. So Houston bound we found out in June of 2009 and had to be there in August. So my plans that I had kind of, carefully laid out to return to healthcare management consulting or to big biotech kind of went out the window.
Hmm.
Uh, Initially ended up at a larger company in medical devices down in Houston. It was pretty much the only game in town. There really was no biotech, commercial stage biotech to speak of back in 2009. I don't know if there is yet. And spent some time at a larger company, but really had more of an entrepreneurial itch. And so went through the process of trying to network in the Texas Medical Center, and was able to strike up an acquaintance with an electrophysiologist who had an interesting idea that ultimately became Soranis. And yeah, that's kind of at a very high level. That's kind of my background and what brought me to that opportunity.
Well, I guess it would be rude to not ask. Did your wife make it to the moon?
So she's flown twice to station. We actually separated in 2017, and I've subsequently moved back to California. But she's still pursuing her passion, and
That's
I
awesome.
wish her well. I'm sure she'll end up there.
Good. Um, so this is where things get really interesting, right? So, I guess before I dive in, because I want to really frame this. So it was two founders, is that correct? There was two people. How big was that initial team that decided to start Soranis?
Right. So I think technically I believe there were three people there. I was employee number four. I believe the physician and the graduate student were technically considered the two founders of the company.
Right.
The third person was an undergrad at Rice who was instrumental in many ways in helping to shape that company, and I still keep in touch with her to this day. But from an equity perspective, the other two definitely had a larger stake. They were classified as the founders of the company.
So they were the technical side of the company. So they had an idea. Okay, fine. So that makes sense. So give me an answer. So you're really a commercial background, is that right? And give me that insight in terms of where your focus has been, regardless of whether it was big biotech or as you went into,
Yeah,
anything else?
yeah, no, absolutely. So I've definitely been a commercial guy my entire career. My background was in microbiology for an undergrad degree, but I transitioned very quickly. All the consulting work I had done was with sales and marketing for companies in healthcare. Uh,
Mm,
my internships were both in corporate development, and my work at the larger medtech company was in marketing as well. So I'm definitely a commercial guy by training. I think I was sort of brought in to be the adult in the room as well. I think that the founding team was cognizant of the fact that they didn't have a lot of background in setting up a company, which was great. I mean, so oftentimes you hear these horror stories of technical or clinical founders who are brilliant in the clinic or in a
mm.
lab, and then they try to run a company and it just doesn't go well. The doctor knew from day one that was not his goal. His goal was to get the technology into the clinic, and he was very hands off. He was willing to relinquish that control. He had gone down a couple of paths to try to set up a company, and we had to sort of unwind a lot of that because it wasn't done properly. And he was completely understanding and accommodating. So I couldn't have asked for anything better. He was great in that respect.
Yeah, interesting. So the balance between technology, science, and commercial is that perfect harmony. We hear it time and time again in terms of or, founders or early stage companies that are falling in love with their science or their tech and do not appreciate the value of commercial early are just set up to fail, regardless of how good the tech is and the impact it could have on a population of people. So, how far in were they in sort of product development before you came on board?
Yeah, so they had some functional prototypes. We may have done a small amount of animal testing. The technology originated from Texas Heart Institute, and they have a phenomenal animal lab down in the basement. We did a lot of it after I got there. I want to say maybe they did one or two preliminary studies. We had some working prototypes. But it was fairly early. I think at the time we had maybe 4 or 5 pieces of IP, some provisionals, nothing had issued yet.
Hmm.
Uh, so it was fairly early on.
So, before I ask you in terms of why at that point they felt it was right to bring on a commercial perspective, what is the technology?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't haven't mentioned any of that. So, Medi's an electrophysiologist by training, the physician who came up with this idea, but it actually really is not applicable to his field. So, what he was noticing from folks in his practice, the ICs, the interventional cardiologists who were doing large bore interventional procedures, so TAVRs, EVARs, balloon pumps. These are procedures that require you to, insert large devices into the femoral artery, into the largest artery in a patient's leg, and you can kind of thread it up through the vascular system. And based on what condition you're treating, that dictates where you need to go and what intervention you have to do once you get there. In order to prevent a blood clot from developing, these patients have to be aggressively anticoagulated. And by definition, if you're having, a heart valve replaced, or you have a AAA, or you have, an Impella procedure, these people tend to have very frail, fragile vascular systems to begin with. So they're very prone to leaking. And that's actually one of the most common complications of these procedures is access site bleeding. Because when you're done with the procedure, well, during the procedure you're bleeding, you take the device out and you try to plug it with, a seal, some sort of a seal. But oftentimes these patients continue to bleed, and that's a major problem. You have to be able to monitor them. You have to be able to assess if that bleeding continues and be able to intervene. Um, Peri-procedurally, one of the things that Medi's colleagues had noticed was these patients will bleed, and when they bleed, they're on the table laying in a supine position on their back. They bleed retroperitoneally, so you actually don't see it. And that's even more dangerous because there's really not a way for the interventionalist to know that this patient is bleeding out internally. The first sign that they get clinically is their blood pressure starts to drop. And
Mm,
unfortunately, in order for that to happen, typically these patients are losing I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was hundreds of cc's of blood. I mean, it's almost a crisis when you first get a sign in the cath lab that the patient's becoming hypotensive.
Right.
And so, then you have to figure out, what do we do? Do we abandon this case? Do we go surgical? It just becomes really challenging. And what Mehdi was wondering was, is there a way to monitor this in the body in real time during the procedure? And what they came up with, which was an elegant solution, but yeah, I mean, it's very simple. And oftentimes I feel like the simple solutions tend to be the ones that actually work.
Mm.
What We realized that you could monitor the bioimpedance. So the resistance around the blood vessel, the electrical resistance actually drifts over time. It actually drifts as a result of what we call perivascular fluid accumulation. And so we realized if we could find a way to monitor that in real time and alert the doctor in some way, shape, or form that they could take evasive actions. What we heard from the interventionalist was, if we knew the patient was starting to bleed, we'd ease off on administering the lytics and we would apply pressure, and you give it 5 or 10 minutes and it'll resolve. And then you just continue on with the procedure. But not knowing which patients are bleeding or when that's happening, that's kind of the main problem. And it happens. We ended up doing a pretty extensive chart on it. And then after I had left the company, they actually funded a 200 patient study to show, how often does this happen and what are the outcomes when you use our device or not. And I'll get to that later.
Mm.
But, the frequency of these complications is not insignificant. It was somewhere on the order of maybe 15 to 25% of the time these patients are bleeding. Um, and if you're talking about when these events happen, if you don't have a mechanism to catch it until it's almost a crisis, you're obviously adding a lot of cost, a lot of time, and morbidity and mortality to the equation, right? And so we realized if we could monitor that and alert the physician, that'd be a winning combination. What we ultimately ended up doing was designing basically a catheter that you could insert into the femoral that had little electrodes built into the wall. It was sort of when they extruded the catheter and designed it, they built electrodes into the wall. It was flush. You didn't feel it. It didn't disturb any of the blood flow. It was thin enough. The wires were thin enough, but they were able to monitor the electrical conductivity around the blood vessel. And then we had sort of a little device that we put up on the flush line that had some LEDs on it, some green and red LEDs and a sound. And so it was a combination of visual and audio cues that would
Mm.
alert the operator to whether a bleed was happening, and if it did happen and they took evasive action, did that resolve it or is it continuing to deteriorate? Right.
Oh, super interesting. I love how simple the
Very.
technology was to
I
solve
mean,
a real
yeah, I mean,
problem.
bioimpedance spectroscopy has been around for decades. The predicate that we use for that technology is a device made by a company in Australia. I actually ran into the CEO a few months ago over at LSI and let her know.
Mm.
But they use it for measuring lymphedema in breast cancer survivors. So
Mm.
completely different field, right? Completely different application, but the underlying technology is exactly the same.
Wow. So take us back to that start then. So how did you meet the other founders, and what sort of unraveled for you to be sort of joining a company at that point? Where were you, before that, and what were you considering, and even what enticed you to join a company at that stage?
Yeah. So I had left the larger company and was doing a brief stint as a consultant with a smaller outfit that had secured a contract with a very large state program that was running back then called CPRIT, which was the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. So it has nothing to do with cardiovascular, and I'll explain how I ended up getting introduced to Medi. It was sort of ironic. But CPRIT was a $3 billion state bond that the Texas voters had voted on before I had moved down there. And the crux of the bond was Texans were frustrated with the fact that there was a lot of interesting basic research and discovery happening in the medical center in Houston and all over Texas. But when it came time to actually translating that into a product or building a company, that technology 9 times out of 10 got spun out into one of the coasts or Minneapolis, and they felt like they were losing out on part of that economic pie. And so they
Mm.
basically said, well, how can we make Texas a third coast for innovation in healthcare, right? We got great hospitals, but people aren't sticking around to start companies here.
Right.
Uh, so people figured money's a good place to start. Free money's even better. And if we can set up some sort of a program to encourage or entice or induce companies to be formed here or relocate here, maybe that's a start. But healthcare overall is just too large of a topic to chat to kind of tackle.
Mm.
So let's focus on one particular area or condition. So they chose cancer. MD Anderson's right there. It's one of the leading cancer institutes on the planet, and it sort of was a no-brainer. Let's just focus on cancer. And they had really three pillars to that program. There were academic programs where they were trying to encourage PIs and researchers to relocate their labs or set up labs there. They had prevention programs. Let's work on identifying, doing some early screening so we can identify if people have cancer early. The earlier you diagnose it, typically the better off your shot is of treating
Yeah.
it, managing it. And then there were the commercialization programs. And that third bucket was kind of where we got involved, right? And so the consulting firm I worked with had a contract to administer those programs for the state. And I joined that because I figured this is probably a good opportunity to, network, meet
Right.
people who have new technologies and find one that sounds interesting and maybe they need somebody to help. Now, what happened was a friend of mine actually had Medi as a patient for a completely unrelated condition. He had some heart issues, and he went and Medi had talked to this person about his interesting idea that was going to become Serranis. And so this guy came back to me and said, "Why don't you talk to this doctor? He's got an interesting idea. Don't know if it has any legs." But he seems very passionate, and so I met him through an introduction through a consultant that I work with.
Had you been involved in startups at that point previously?
No, no, no,
So
that was my
you,
first one. Yeah.
so you'd gone from big corp to right to the start of startup life. Okay, so
Yeah.
who was that initial team then? So when you joined the company, what did it look like?
Right. So it was Mehdi was the founder and the clinician.
Yeah.
The graduate student at Rice who had developed the prototypes was a gentleman named Alex. And then the undergrad was a woman named Joanna. And I came in as effectively employee number four in the group. So, but
So
everybody else had a day job, right? I was the only person working on this full time.
wow.
Yeah.
And did you come in straight away as well, I guess what did they want you to do? What was the role they gave you? What was your responsibilities when you first came in?
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was hired as the CEO, and step one was let's create a company. Step two is we need to, secure the license for the technology from Texas Heart. And step three was, let's build a plan and go raise some money and actually start product development. I mean, it's that's obviously drastically simplifying it, but those were sort of the marching orders. We have a working prototype. We have a general understanding of what it is that we want to build. We have to create a company. And again, like I said, many had already tried to create a company and didn't really quite do it the right way. So we
Right.
had to unwind what was done previously, and fortunately, they didn't go too far down the path. It was fairly straightforward to unwind that and set up a C corp and do the license, and then go down the process of building out the story, building a pitch deck, a business plan, and then soliciting funding and getting product development going. Um,
I love how, for want of a better word, ordinary. It's the stuff that people don't realize you actually have to do to launch a company. It's
oh
not
yeah, yeah,
it's not disrupting at that point. It's just setting up operations and stuff like that and figuring out the path that you have to follow if you're going to make this work. Well, coming in as the CEO, that would sort of indicate that the three technical guys and the founder had the right perspective. They knew they weren't going to be able to do that, or that maybe they didn't want to because that wasn't what they were passionate about. But that feels like they had the right mindset. Like, did you feel that, and was that something that was attractive to you, when you were assessing to join or not?
I did. It was definitely a requirement in my mind. I didn't want to walk into a situation where I'd be constantly getting second guessed by the clinical founder on every decision I wanted to make,
Right.
or they felt that it was, this is their technology, it's their baby, they want to lead it. And Mehdi was and continues to be. He's actually found. I think he's been involved in two or three other companies since then. And the people that have worked with him on those other companies still say the same thing. He's fantastic. He's great in the clinic. He knows where his strength lies, and
Right.
he's more willing to hand off the baton. I think Alex has actually grown into that role. Subsequent to this, he's gone on to be involved with a couple of other companies that have been very successful and raised a lot of capital. So
Interesting.
and he has gone into it as a CEO, right? So his first Seronis, he was the founder and CTO, and through that, I think he grew a lot, um, and now he's the top dog when he gets involved with companies. So.
That's awesome. So when you were assessing, you've come from big biotech, you've got this opportunity to join ultimately what is an idea for a company. What was it that enticed you at that time that made you think, yeah, this is the right move to make at this point in my career?
I think, well, there were a few things. I mean, first and foremost, the team. Having spent some time in consulting and worked with a range of clients, some people you want to work for, and some people you just can't wait for that engagement to be over. And for me personally, it's very important to work with people that you like working with. I just don't do well in hostile work environments. Some people can if you pay them enough, or they can just compartmentalize, but that's not
Yeah.
really how I operate. I like to be with a team that I know and trust and respect. And I felt like we had that on day one. I felt like that was something that that was it was a no-brainer. That was there.
Mm.
I had some preliminary discussions with some other folks who did not have a vested interest in the company, just to get a barometer, get a sense. Is what this company is pursuing? Is this a viable? Is this really an unmet need? Is this something that exists, or are they making this up to try to make themselves feel better? And that was not the case. They had gone about it, having incubated the technology inside of Texas Heart, which is a very reputable institute in the world of cardiovascular medicine. They were doing things the right way. The company, the institute was doing things the right way in terms of securing the IP, uh, positioning us in a manner that would make it very straightforward to carve this out and spin it out as a new co. Their reputation, their tech transfer group had a very positive reputation. Other hospitals in that area, I will not name names, have reputations for being very difficult to spin out technology and license technology out. They make the terms so egregious that nobody would do it, right?
In terms
Um,
of equity or percentage of future revenue and stuff like that?
Fronts, they'll ask for, enormous amounts of capital up front before you've secured any financing just to license the technology, and it makes it really difficult to get financing. If you say, we
Tragic,
need
really, isn't it?
all this
Tragic.
money to pay the hospital to get started. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, all of those things played into it, and also, I mean, the the other elephant in the room was that Seaport was going through a bit of a challenging time as well. They had a little bit of an incident with some people were on a panel reviewing an award that the applicant was actually married to somebody on the panel, and he did not recuse himself. So there was a little bit of a scandal, almost you would call it,
Wow.
and they had to kind of take a time out and take a pause. So I don't know. I didn't know at the time how much longer that program would last. It turned out that they cleared that up. They actually re-upped and they did a second round on the bond. They're $6 billion in, I think, at this point. But I didn't know that. And so here's an opportunity to join a team that sounds engaged. They share kind of a passion for developing this technology. They're willing to bring somebody in who doesn't necessarily have a huge track record of starting companies, but is equally passionate to learn. Um, and so everything just kind of aligned. I just said, let's go for it.
What were the things that you think you brought to the table at that point that they would benefit from the most and that they really valued in you?
So I think one of the things in the grad program I did, it was a joint program with the business school at MIT and the med school at Harvard, and it was geared towards entrepreneurship. The entire program was, and it was funny because as a student, I did not really see myself going down that path. At that time, I thought, okay, I'm going to boomerang back to California, and either I'm going to just go back to my consulting gig where I had the golden handcuffs and they were going to, pay my student loans, or I'd go work at a big company in Amgen or,
Mm,
Genentech or something.
mm,
I didn't see myself going down that path, but just through the curriculum that they develop, you end up learning a lot of the mechanics of all of these things that, as you said, these are just things that a lot of people just don't even think about. If you need to start a company, if you want to get a company going, step 1 through 100.
Yeah.
Um, and having that formal business training, I feel like there's mixed opinions. A lot of people who've even gone through the MBA programs will say it's a commodity at this point. So many people have them, but there are certain skills. You need to be able to assemble a pro forma. You want to be able to do some DCF modeling. You want to, show the potential investors what what the exit events look like. What's sort of the appetite right now for acquisitions and as a multiple of revenues or EBITDA, or how do you want to
Yeah.
value that, right? What's going to be their IRR or their rate of return? And these guys didn't have that background. I mean, Mehdi was a skilled clinician. Joanna was a bioengineer. Alex was a grad student in bioengineering. So they were very strong on the technical side, but they just didn't have that business background.
Yeah. That makes sense. So you get in. What is the next? I mean, you were there, how long did you do in the end with the company?
I was there about 4 years. It started in 2013 and left in 2017. Yeah.
So how did that 4 years sort of unravel, and how did the sort of product develop, and the sort of commercialization strategy and so forth? How did it progress?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember. I mean, my dates may be a little fuzzy, but I want to say it probably took about 6 months to 9 months to get any money in, other than, I think Medi gave us a little bit of money to kind of bootstrap and get things going. But we got some early money in from some of the local angel investors.
Did you have a
Um,
salary when you joined?
I did not at the beginning. No, it was equity. It was a good chunk of equity, more
Sure.
than reasonable. But the trade-off was until I had some money in from the angels, I wasn't going to get paid, right?
Yeah.
And that was, again, at the time in my life, it worked. We were a dual income household. My wife had a stable job at NASA. The cost of living in Houston is nothing like it is in California.
Yeah.
Didn't have kids, so it worked. It worked at that time. Could I do it again right now? No.
Mm. Yeah.
That definitely wouldn't work now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, it was hard going at the beginning for sure. Once you get some early investment, then obviously it gets, I don't want to say easy, but it gets a little bit more manageable, because then those people can also refer you to people they know. And then ultimately we ended up securing some investments from a group of folks. This was a great group, and I have yet to find a similar cohort in Silicon Valley or anywhere really. Maybe there are a few that exist, but there was a group of these centimillionaires and a few billionaires that would loosely invest in technologies that they found interesting. They all lived in Houston, and when they came in from, their yachts or jetted in from wherever, they'd meet, once a month and listen to a select group of people that would come in and present ideas. And they're called the Grand Order of Successful Entrepreneurs, the Goose Society. And sort of the ringleader at the time was the guy who founded it was a guy named Jack Gill. And Jack was a veteran venture capitalist from Sand Hill from, I think, the 80s early on, and made a killing out there. But grew up actually, I think, near Beaumont, Texas, or somewhere in East Texas. And so he came back. He lived in Houston. That was really the primary residence. He actually taught a course on entrepreneurship in healthcare at Rice
Wow.
University. Joanna, one of the early people that I'd mentioned in the company, had taken the class, had gotten to know Jack. I think he really liked her. He saw sort of an interest and a spark in her, and so that was sort of our way in, if you will.
Wow.
And so we got a chance to kind of come in and talk to him, and it was hard going at first, for sure. I mean, because again, I had never done this before. And so I'm coming in as the inexperienced first time CEO, and he's just sitting there kind of, raking me over the coals, right? Oh, you need to do this. You need to present your information this way. I need to see it this, that. I don't have time to teach you all this stuff. And I was really getting a little concerned, like, God, is this going anywhere? But what he was doing through the process was effectively showing me, right, this is how you go about building your case. This is how investors are going to want to see your presentation. What you're doing right now is pretty slides from consulting, and that's great, but that's not going to get the company funded. This is what you need to do, and this is how you need to present it, you know. And I didn't know it at the time because he didn't really present it that way.
Right.
But that's what was happening, was he was sort of, spoon feeding me and showing me and kind of teaching me the process of how to go through and do this. Um,
Amazing.
so we ultimately ended up getting the lion's share of I think I raised around $5 million for Serranos when all was said and told. We did a couple of, like, it was a seed round and a couple of A rounds. Probably 95% of the dollars came
Wow.
from those guys. There were a couple of folks from Houston Angel Network that would come in, but they'd put in 25 grand usually, was sort of the minimum that we would want to take just for dealing with the putting them on the cap table.
Yeah.
Whereas the Goose guys, there was one investor that gave me a check for $500,000, and I had not laid eyes on him. I had not met him until the day that he handed me the check. And he said, "Look, Jack's into this, Larry's into this." He named off a few of the other Goose investors, and if they're in, I'm in. And here's $500,000. So I mean that was unheard of in my mind, right? Right?
That's not happening today, I'll tell you.
Definitely definitely would not happen in this environment. No,
What year
but
was this, Michael?
that was probably 2015, maybe 2015.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
I love how that works, though. I love that if there's a couple of investors and you're in this group and you know them that well and trust them, and if two of the people in that group go in, you're in because you just know as a group you're there for each other. What a fantastic way, to be able to invest. If you've made, money in life and you're at that point where you want to put things back in, what an incredible community to be a part of and be able to feel you can trust other people's opinion like that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think again, it was play money to them. I mean, that's real money
Sure.
in our world, but this gentleman, I think his net worth was around $2 billion. So I mean, it was just that's like just betting on the ponies,
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
So 5 million in the bank. Where did the product go from there, and how was it developed, and how successful was it?
Yeah, so I introduced the group to prior to this, as I said, I worked at a larger company in Houston, and we had worked with a design firm at the time that did phenomenal work. The head of R&D introduced me to them. He had spent some time with them when he was at Guidant. It was a group called Cambridge Consultants. And we did a project with them at the bigger company for an automated electronic seizure diary that had some components that were just, fairly early, fairly emerging tech. That was right around the time the iPhone had come out, maybe a few
Right.
years after. And so talking about Zigbee and Bluetooth protocols, that was all brand new technology at the time. And so I said, if what we're trying to do here on certain aspects, the technology is well understood and well established, but the way that we're trying to apply it and is going to require some cutting edge design. And let's go out and let's go talk to a few design firms. So we shopped around. I think we met with 5 or 6 of them, but ultimately we ended up going with 2 different groups. We went with Cambridge for kind of developing the algorithm and developing the sensor. And then the sheath, the component that actually goes into the body, we went with a company called I think it was Vention Medical, if I remember right, because we needed somebody that had real strong proficiencies with the extrusion, right? And they have to be able to extrude this catheter with the electrodes embedded into the wall, and you can't have any of the metal exposed on the inside of the lumen because you have blood going through there, right?
Right.
And if it makes contact with that, it could provoke some sort of a reaction. And so it was tricky to come up with how do we do that and have reasonable yields when they're making it, right? Because sometimes it just doesn't work and you got to throw it away. Well, you have to pay for that material still.
Michael, when you're setting up early agreements with vendors at that point for those two services, the 5 million isn't going to go too far, right? So are you setting up sort of mutually beneficial, like win-win agreements where they're also maybe coming in, a part of their agreement is equity in the product as well, or are you able to pay, cash to get things developed?
We didn't. We thought about it. I think we may have actually even approached them about it, and I don't remember if both of them turned us down. I know for sure one of them did. Said that we really are not interested in taking the equity. We need money. We didn't have the 5 million all up front either. Just to be
Right.
fair,
Yeah.
we got it would come in tranches, and so those
Yeah.
tranches were designed to get us to a certain milestone, right? Um, whether the algorithm is kind of designed, locked down, it's working, and then we have sort of a working prototype that has
Then you
certain
get the
components
next. Yeah.
and functionality, then we get to the next level.
Yeah.
And the idea was we would scope out with each of them, how long do we think this is going to take? What's sort of the monthly burn, right? And then I had sort of a burn down chart that I would maintain every month. Here's the cash in the bank. Here's where we thought we would be in terms of our spend. Here's where we really are. And the understanding was from the design firms, if things start to go sideways, we may need to, slow down. We may need to hibernate the program so we could secure more funding. That did actually happen about three-quarters of the way through. We did have to park it for a little bit because we were just spending spending it faster than we had hoped, right?
Mm.
And I mean, that's nothing new. I mean, you know, that happens in practically every startup. You always want to anticipate the worst, and things happen. Things happen that you just don't anticipate.
Over the 4 years you were there as CEO, how did the company grow, and across what departments did you need to grow out?
Yeah, it did. I mean, so I was employee number four. I think when I left, we had 12 or 14 people. We brought in fairly early on. Who came first? Well, we had some summer interns first after the four people started. We had some people come in that were just undergrad, I think undergrads, and we had one person who was interested in going to medical school. uh he's now a vascular surgeon. I still keep in
Wow.
touch with him, so he did really well. um but we had a few summer interns that came in, and they'd work on little side projects and the R&D stuff and work with Joanna or Alex on that. I didn't have a lot of visibility to what they were doing. I just knew that it wasn't a huge capital outlay.
Yeah.
I did actually give them small option awards. Even the summer interns, I gave them a small option awards, and that was
That's
important
cool.
in my mind, so that everybody feels like they got skin in the game, right? Everybody feels like you have a piece of the pie, and that was something that was very important to me personally. Was I made sure that anyone who was working with us in any capacity outside of like a consulting relationship was going to have some small sliver. And
Mm.
people came up to me afterwards and were very grateful. They were very happy that was the case.
Mm.
Um, the first hire, I'm trying to remember who came first. So we had a CFO that came in that kind of helped me on a fractional basis, and he was a former partner from one of the big four firms. He had worked at a pharmaceutical company up in the Woodlands that had a big exit. Actually, the CEO was one of the goose people. She was one of the investors. And then I brought in a gentleman who had worked with a company down there called IDEF that had gotten acquired by Abbott, and he was an operations guy. Because once we started getting to the point where we were starting to really move on with the process with product development.
Yeah.
We're getting to a point where there's just a lot of logistical things that need to happen as the company grows. And I did not, again, I didn't have a background. I wasn't a COO before. I had never done that. And this gentleman, I think we met him at a networking event somewhere, somewhere down in Houston. I knew he was available. He was on the bench. He had worked at great companies. He had been at bigger companies, so he understood kind of the process that they're used to seeing.
Mm.
Ultimately, obviously, our goal, our objective was to get on somebody's radar and get acquired. So I wanted to make sure we were doing things in a manner that would be conducive to a larger company coming in and showing interest. Having been, spent time with the M&A teams at, Amgen and Genzyme and the big biotech companies, time and again, that was always a source of contention, right? Well, the company sounds interesting, the technology looks interesting, but boy, the operations are in shambles, or it's just we're going to have to repeat a lot of stuff. We're going to have to redo a lot of things and make sure that actually it checks out in our eyes. And so I wanted to make sure that we weren't setting ourselves up for that kind of an issue down the road. And so I was able to bring him on board fairly early on. Um, I think he subsequently went with Joanna. Joanna's now the CEO of another startup, and he's as well. He's the COO with her. So it's interesting to kind
Awesome.
of see the lineage and how people who were working with us at Serranos have stuck together and continue to work together.
What was your role like in that sort of first 12 months? Like what were you doing on a daily basis whilst the product was in development, and how did they sort of utilize you? Was it a lot of my assumption would be it would be a lot of meeting people to try and drive opportunity and collaboration and see, even when you're talking about hiring these people, you're ultimately trying to utilize whatever angle you can. Interns, undergrads,
Yeah.
fractional CFOs, stuff like every small decision has such a big impact on cash burn at that stage. So it's you're trying every angle. Is it so? Was that a big part of your role to try and find ways to, just give you guys an extra 1%?
Yeah, yeah, that's what kept me up at night. What's exactly what you're saying? How can we operate more efficiently? How can we maximize the value for every dollar that's in the house? I spent an inordinate amount of time chasing down early stage investors before we secured the money with Goose. I mean, I was talking to angel groups in California, in the Midwest. Uh,
So
it
it's
was
heavy
hard because
business development.
yeah, well, and it's hard because the angel groups that are the further away they get, the less likely they are to want to necessarily invest in a company that's in Texas, unless they know somebody there, right? If they know somebody there, they trust somebody, or they have someone on the board that they know that's kind of keeping an eye on things.
Yeah.
Uh, it just became really hard. But we were chasing down leads all over the country. Um, you know, yeah, yeah. I jokingly referred to my job as the cash extraction officer, the CEO.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was my role. I was working on trying to secure financing to fund the development any way I could
And then try and find ways internally to not spend it quickly once you get it.
quickly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, super interesting. Um, so 4 years, where was the company when you left? What status were they? How far had the company come at that point?
Yeah, so we were pretty far along. I mean, we had done, I believe, three Q sub meetings, or at the time they called them pre-sub meetings with the FDA.
Hmm.
We had a pretty good feel for the path we were going to go down. We were definitely trending towards a de novo 510K. The concern at the time was that that would likely require a clinical study. It just seemed like practically every de novo in that era was requiring some sort of a clinical program. I believe they actually ended up not having to have it, but that was part of the calculus as to why I stepped down. And we brought in another gentleman who had more of a clinical background to kind of see it through.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, we had gone through product development. I believe we were in design freeze at that point, and kind of in the final stages of getting ready to prepare to submit.
So
And
what
then
so in essence, you've taken, as a commercial perspective, business operations, never having been a CEO before, never worked in a startup before, you've come in as basically the first non-technologist in a startup who just has an idea. It's like on the back of a napkin sort of idea. And that by the time you've left the company, they have a fully developed product that is ultimately then seeking approval through whatever means.
yeah,
What what's the biggest lessons learnt from doing that? And would you, if you could go back, people love to say no regrets, or people love to say, but what would you do differently, and what would you do the same?
yeah. So I think the one element, the one thing that happened during my tenure that was really unfortunate, and I don't know what I could have really done to change that outcome, was we had to actually let one of our founders go.
Mm,
And that was a really difficult decision. That was one that the board was essentially mandating. It was driven by the fact that they were kind of going down very exploratory paths with our design firm, asking them to conduct additional studies that didn't necessarily further the advancement of the program, but were more just intellectual curiosities, which of
sure.
course the design firm was more than willing to do, but then they started sending us bills. And those bills really started to mount up very quickly. And so once I realized what was going on, I had to nip that in the bud and talk to the design firm and said, basically, don't lift a finger without me telling you to do it.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I was actually in Las Vegas for a conference, for the Viva conference. I spent most of the time on the phone with our attorneys and the board, because we were trying to figure out how do we go about how do we right the ship. right?
Mm.
As soon as it came to my attention, I obviously brought it to the board's attention, and certainly I'm going to take a hit on the chin for letting that happen on my watch. Um, but I said, look, this is as soon as I realized this was going on. Once I got the invoices, this came right to my attention. You guys immediately were called, and I've already told the design firm, cease, stop, don't do anything else on these little side projects. We need to get this under control internally. But that actually caused a little bit of a stall in the program because we had to basically halt everything. It definitely threw off our cash flow. We were
Yeah.
way under the spend line or way over the spend line at that point
Yeah.
relative to what we thought we were going to be doing.
Mm.
Um, and that was a tough time. I mean, that was a really tough time. I mean, I sat this person down. I said, look, I'm really sorry. We got to let you go. And, they're sitting there saying, you don't have the authority to do that. I said, well, technically I do. You report to me and I report to the board and the board's demanding this. And this is the way it's going to be. And that was hard. That was hard. That definitely fractured our relationship. It took a long time before I think I ever really said anything to that person. Months went by, right? And there's
Mm.
probably still a little bit of animosity, but what can I do better? I always prided myself on I've always felt that if I choose the right people and they are doing the right thing and they're going to come to me when they have questions, but otherwise I will let them go ahead and make their decisions. I really don't like micromanagers. I had
Mm.
worked with them before in bigger companies and I just don't operate that way, but maybe this person needed a little more supervision in
Do you,
hindsight. You
it's actually quite common though, isn't it, in that founders of really early stage companies that are trying to bring something so new to that has to go through these super long processes. These companies have phases, right? And the people that are right at the first phase aren't necessarily right at phase 4 or phase 10, and they're just at some point, even if they are the founder, that doesn't, and this is not in just med tech, this is in any industry,
know?
right? That this,
Yeah,
like, to get to the next, what's the famous saying, to get us where we want to go, you can't do what got us here, kind of thing.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really interesting. I mean, that happens a lot. Do you look back on the Serrana story as, I'm so glad I did it. It was just a life-changing amount of sort of, experience and development for me and learning. Or do you look back on it and go, that was incredibly stressful and no, I don't want to do that again? Or maybe somewhere in the middle.
Well, no, it's a little bit of both. I mean, to be honest, yeah, I loved the experience. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I don't know that I would change a whole lot more, other than maybe, like I said, have a little more supervision on people that need it.
Yeah.
Um, I think that, so subsequent to that role, I moved back to California and started another company and got them up and running, got their A round going, and there was a neurostimulator for sleep apnea. And I spent the last 5 years running the US ops for a company that's based in Sweden, but is very small as well. So I've kind of stayed in that smaller
Right.
space ever since. And I don't think that I would have had those opportunities did I not have this, on my resume, that I had already started a company basically from a cocktail napkin sketch or pieces of plastic from Home Depot welded together to be kind of a crude prototype. I don't think that I would have had those opportunities. But yeah, it was incredibly stressful. Doing the fundraising, people's lives and livelihoods are riding on your ability to secure funding as a first time CEO with no track record. That's hard. That's really hard, you know. But
What an
it's fun.
incredible awakening, just thrown in at the deep end. And I love that you've stayed in that world after, because, there's so many companies that want someone who's got in as early as possible, but they struggle to find somebody that early. And the difference between coming in as the first non-technical person in a med tech company is
Mhm.
completely different to coming in as the first commercial person in a 10-man company, where you're probably coming in to sort of lead sales or commercial strategy, but there's a CEO or two founders, or who maybe have a commercial plan, but they need someone to sort of beef it up and execute. So that, I mean, that's phase 1 and phase 2 already. So I mean, you've really gone in from the ground up, and that's rare to find people that have done that and thrown themselves into it. Um, and at that point, it's not just a commercial role, is it? Like you say, it's operational, it's
Oh, it's everything.
finance, it's
I mean, I was
everything in
doing the
between.
payroll. I was doing the web
Right.
design. Yeah, yeah, you're doing everything. Yeah, and it's interesting because you talk about sort of the skill set that's required as the company evolves, right? So, I mean, I was the first CEO. I think they had four after me. Let me look. I wrote them down. No, there were four after me. So the next person that came in had more of a clinical background. He got it through the 510(k). Then my boss's boss from the big company came, and he got lured in because the head of R&D I had attracted over to join my board, and I think that guy lured this guy over, and he raised I think $13 million and hired a bunch of reps and started a 200 patient clinical study to be able to validate that this unmet need is real, because that was, of
Mm,
course, a big problem. You try to go in and talk to an interventionalist and say, your patients have bleeding complications. Not with these hands, not in my room, not in my cath lab,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if it's not in the literature, they don't believe it, and the insurance won't pay for it. So I mean, it was a whole sort of sequence of events. But I was not the right person to at the time to do that, to go raise $13 million, hire a bunch of sales reps, and start this study. I mean, this
Yeah.
other person had done that before,
Yeah.
you know. And so everybody that comes in kind of brings a different skill set to the table.
Were you able to maintain your equity in the company after you left? Had that sort of vested and you maintained that?
I did, but it got diluted, right? Because I mean, the
As
more
they, yeah, yeah.
raise, you get diluted. And ultimately, when they eventually did get acquired, I didn't see any of it. I think it was a matter of a function of two things. It was they raised a lot of capital through multiple rounds and time. And so the ultimate acquisition that came in, the preferred shares got paid out first, and then there was nothing left for the common at the end, which
Mm,
is disheartening. But I still say, to your point, I mean, as a first attempt at a startup, not coming in as an entry level employee, but the CEO, to take a company from a cocktail napkin sketch to something that eventually gets acquired by a blue chip company, that's great. I mean, the only thing I could ask for that would be above that would be making some money off of it, and yeah, that'd be nice, but
yeah,
but
but so, yeah, everyone knows that, but at the same time, those lessons learned are unbelievable, aren't they? And what you take into the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. There's people that are in corporate life who just climb the ladder, and at some point, 20, 15, 20 years in, they go, what have I done? There's no
right,
challenge,
right.
and financially they're probably they're okay, they're good, they're probably, got great 401(k)s and a bit of equity and, stuff like that. But they get to a point and they look back and they go, I really need to throw myself into something here. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great lesson learned, and it's so good for the people's development to get. In fact, there's just not many opportunities to go do what you've done, like at all.
There's not, and it's like I said earlier too. It's really it's fun to kind of look back and see where the people are now that I've worked with before, right? And Joanna's been incredibly successful at starting her own company, and she brought Ken with her, and he's doing the operations. And my the undergrad who wanted to be a doctor is now wrapping up his residency in vascular surgery, and everybody's kind of progressing,
It's
which is
awesome.
just it's so cool. I'm actually going to talk to him on Saturday, the vascular surgeon. I still keep in touch with him.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so
I guess before we wrap this up, then, Michael, the only I think relevant question is how do you see um the startup world at the moment in the current landscape, and how does it differ to the opportunities that you potentially had back then?
it's really tough. I mean, it is a tough market. So I'm helping out as a part-time sort of commercialization advisor to an
Right.
anesthesia nurse out here in Southern California who's spinning a technology out of one of the UCs, and he's been incredibly lucky. I mean, he got a phase one SBIR on his first try. He got a phase two on his second try. We tried 5 times to get a phase one at Serranos. We hired consultants. We did everything we could, and we couldn't seem to crack that nut. And he got it on the first try.
Right.
He is the CEO. He is, considering the fact that he has no business training whatsoever, he is phenomenal.
Mm.
He is coachable. He listens. He wants feedback. He wants to grow. Um, but the one thing that's really challenging is the funding. I mean, we're super fortunate that we landed that phase 2 award, and that it's not getting clawed back. But a lot of people, he knows a lot of people that either just are not getting funded, or their awards are getting clawed back because of what's going on with the administration and Doge and the cutbacks. Um, it's a tough funding environment. It's a tough funding environment all the way around. Anytime the non-dilutive capital dries up, it just makes the competition even higher. Uh, I talk to people who are in companies that are outside the U.S. as well. I've been keeping close tabs on a company that whose CEO I've known for 3 years, who's up in Canada, and he's in the middle of trying to raise capital right now, and he's saying, I can't get it from any of my current investors. They're all U.S. based, and they're terrified about retribution from the administration. What is going to happen to us if we fund a Canadian company over an American company? And that's just terrible that that's even a consideration. But
Yeah. I mean, I hear this every day. The raising capital is just incredibly difficult right now, and it's not going to fix itself quickly by any stretch of the imagination. My only big concern with it, we've had a really tight job market for about 2 years. But I think it can get a lot worse, because you can't keep not funding innovation and expect the job market to just remain stable. So this is specifically within MedTech. It could absolutely get a lot worse very quickly. And obviously we hear news of layoffs and stuff like that, but we don't hear that it's completely collapsed. We hear about layoffs. We also hear about wins. We know it's hard. We know it's volatile, but there's no sort of word around collapsing, but it absolutely could. It absolutely could if things don't change quickly.
This individual, and again, I mean, this is a commercial stage company. They have 200 pieces of capital equipment deployed around the world. They are a very fundable company. Those were his exact words, and I completely agree with them. And we were at the AUA conference in Las Vegas last month, looking out at the trade show floor, and he said, if this doesn't resolve in the next month or two, this is going to be another 2008 level event. And next year, when this event happens in Baltimore, this trade show room is going to look a lot different. There will be
That probably won't happen, to be honest.
There will be more people unemployed.
Nobody's going to go to trade shows. Yeah, trade shows will be the first thing to stop.
It's scary, very scary. But
yeah,
we'll
interesting.
That's my pay grade. So
let's hope for sunny skies over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and we see improvements. We just need a bit of optimism, don't we? We need some steps in the right direction, because there's just so much caution and capital sitting on the sidelines. But thank you for that perspective, Michael. Michael, thank you for coming on and sharing the story. It's an incredibly unique perspective. There's not many people in the industry who can say they joined a disruptive company at the stage that you've joined them that early, to be non-technical hire number one and take on so much responsibility for the company and drive them forward like you did. The lessons learned, I mean, just invaluable. Just people would pay a lot of money for that experience. So you're incredibly fortunate to have been through it. But thank you for coming on, and thank you for telling the story. It was awesome to hear.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the show. I hope it was insightful and inspiring. This podcast is brought to you by Elevra Consulting. We are a commercially focused recruitment agency focused on medtech and life sciences. If we can help you in your job search, or if you're hiring commercial talent, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, David Philby, or at our website, elevraconsulting.com. Thanks again.